Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Coles. I'm the co-chair for the Black Economic Alliance, and on behalf of my co-chair, Charles Phillips, and the rest of the board of directors, I am before you today just to introduce someone you've already seen, Sam Tweedy. Samantha Tweedy is the new CEO, or Chief Executive Officer for the Black Economic Alliance. You have seen her in her introduction, but you haven't met her, really. And so I want to do this the right way, because Sam has been a driving force, has been the real engine behind what you see here today, and has done a remarkable job. And it's hard to believe she's only been on this job for 10 weeks to have created this kind of extraordinary convening and gathering. Sam Tweedy is a Duke alumna and a Yale Law School graduate as well, and has devoted her entire life to the nonprofit world of education, education innovation, and education ways in which we can actually advance education. Through founding a charter school that's an award-winning charter school, to being the first Chief Advancement Officer for Uncommon Schools, Sam then leveraged all of those opportunities to move to the Robin Hood Foundation, where she served as an executive of that foundation, until she joined as the president for the Black Economic Alliance Foundation, and from there has become our new Chief Executive Officer. You'll be seeing a lot of Sam today, so we thought it was really important for you to just meet her and know who it is that is leading this great effort. So on behalf of the Board of Directors and all the membership for Black Economic Alliance, meet Sam Tweedy. And Sam, we're in your hands now.
You all should consider yourself lucky to get an introduction from Dr. Tony Coles at least once in your lifetime. So thank you, Tony. Thank you to Leader Jeffries and to Jonathan Capehart. As I promised, no better way to start off our day today. For those of you who are new to BEA, BEA came together as a group of committed Black business leaders and aligned advocates around a singular mission: work, wages, and wealth, advancing work, wages, and wealth for the Black community. And now what we do in our work is to analyze, to evaluate, to curate, to build consensus, to drive action, and to support and encourage investment in the leading solutions to advance economic prosperity and wealth building for the Black community. And we work with leaders like all of you across the philanthropic sector, the government sector, around the private sector, because the challenges know no boundaries, and so our work can know no boundaries. BEA serves as an advocate and a support from Wall Street to Washington in helping leaders prioritize and drive the most impactful action around those leading solutions. So the year the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, 1863, the Black community held less than 1% of this nation's wealth. Today, we're 150 plus years later, after a Reconstruction, a civil rights movement, after the nation's response to the murder of George Floyd. And that percentage of wealth has barely budged by less than 2 percentage points. By less than 2 percentage points in 2023. What the data tells us, quite clearly in my opinion, is that what we all are doing isn't working yet. It isn't working yet. We need a new plan. And the answer for us at BEA lies in the fact that the systems and the markets of our economy were intentionally created, and intentionally created to hold back Black Americans. So until we are leaning in to that new approach, we're stuck. We're stuck with an economic infrastructure that holds us back. And so it's on all of us to be able to think about, to act on, to work together, to reshape it, to reimagine it, to re-execute it. And we hope that today marks a key step in that work and in that work together. And we acknowledge that we are gathering at what I wish I could call was a unique time, but not as much a unique time, just as a time that we should mark as a time of particular uncertainty, politically, financially. And we all know, because we are learners of history, that what is happening today in the banking industry and across the country will have the deepest impact and the longest tail on our community. So it just serves as why it's all the more important for us to have the conversations we have today and to lead the work that we'll lead on tomorrow. So a bit about what you can expect from today. We'll start with a beat on the problem. But Charles will tell you, like he told me, this is not a summit to complain and recite the problem. This is a summit to focus on solutions. And so with that backdrop, we'll switch quickly to what it looks like. What's working? We'll do deep dives in a set of interventions that we think are most promising and powerful for advancing Black economic prosperity and wealth building. And then we'll talk about what it looks like to implement and implement well. Because as you all know, whether it's from your company, your organization, being a leader of your sector, if you don't get implementation right, then it's all for naught. For the last year, we've been in conversation with leaders, many of you and other partners, about this exact question. What does it look like to evaluate and curate those leading solutions to advance work, wages, and wealth across sectors? In the coming weeks, we're planning to release something called the Architecture for Action, which is going to be a data-based collection of all of those most significant interventions. But before we do, and this is a really important ask of you all today, before we do, we need your input. That final input as we curate this Architecture for Action. We need to hear your unique perspective, what you're seeing on the ground, where your successes are, where you're facing obstacles. And so before each of the breaks today, you're going to see a few questions go up on the screen, and we ask you to talk about those questions with one another, and at the end of the day, to jump on the QR code and just share your responses with us before you go. And then we'll share in turn back with you that Architecture for Action as soon as it's released, so that we can start to get to work together on those solutions. So thank you again for being with us today. Thank you for all of our speakers who are here to share their expertise and their perspective. Thank you to our sponsors, Deloitte, Bank of America, Capital One Insight Center, AARP, Apple, and Bloomberg Philanthropies. While we're calling them sponsors today, every other day we call them partners because they are full partners in our work each and every day. And to all of our supporters and other partners in the room, thank you. And finally, I want to acknowledge our remarkable board. There is no group of more committed, smarter, more talented, and more about it group of people than you can imagine. And I'm so fortunate to have them standing by my side and in front of me every day. So our first panel that we are going to have on the stage today is appropriately titled, How the Racial Wealth Gap Was Created and Why It's So Hard to Close. No one has spent more time researching and analyzing this topic than the folks that we're going to have the privilege to hear about this from today. But alongside the doctorates, the PhDs, and all of the accolades, what you should know is that these are leaders who are leading real policy solutions on the ground as well. Darrick Hamilton is the founding director of the New Schools Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. Mehrsa Baradaran is the professor of law at UCI and author of the groundbreaking Color of Money. And their conversation will be moderated by Christina Greer, associate professor of political science at Fordham University. But I'm seeing from their faces that Mehrsa still might be stuck in traffic. Is that right? So y'all, you get 10 minutes to go grab coffee, and then we're going to be right back here. And I know you're happy because we started.
She's on her way, and we're just going to keep.
I lied. You don't get coffee. They're going to get started, and Mehrsa's going to hop up on the stage. Welcome, Darrick.
Exactly. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here. You know, we know how to just deal with adversity and flexibility. So Mehrsa's going to join us when she's out of New York City traffic, and we'll have a robust conversation until she joins us. But I'm delighted to talk to Darrick, and I want to thank everyone at BEA Solutions Summit for having us here today. So let's just jump right in. So Darrick, we've had decades of colorblind interventions where, you know, this concept of all tides will lift all boats. And it's really failed to move the needle for the wealth gap for Black people. So why isn't this colorblind solution or this colorblind aspect working?
Nicole Hannah-Jones in the 1619 Project, I think, makes it evident and clear that our political economy, which includes economics, politics, is not separable from the ways in which we divide people based into identity groups. So it's been in our DNA since 1619 that race has been a relevant factor, a transactional factor in the United States. So if we look at periods in which we've been able to generate wealth for the typical American And I dare say that it was during the New Deal with policies like the GI Bill, and there's plenty more, Homestead Act, FHA loans, that we constructed those policies in ways that did not include were not designed for Black people, and they were not managed in a way that was really inclusive. The historian who writes that book is called When Affirmative Action Was White, Ira Katznelson. He lays this out. So, you know, we can give examples, and I'll be quick so we can keep it moving. Take Social Security. Take the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act provided safeguards for labor so that they could collectively bargain, the right to collectively bargain with capital. Well, in both of those original legislations, agricultural workers and domestic workers were excluded. And in the 1930s, women engaged in work that were Black were 90% involved in one of those entities, and over half of Black men. Well, that was a design issue. And the people that designed it were astute to know that that would be racially disparate. So I'm being slightly long-winded, but the point is, if you do not actively, in the design, in the implementation, in the management of policies, incorporate race inclusivity or gender inclusivity, the default in the United States will be disparate outcomes for different communities. You know, the other big example is, even now, when we think about legislation under the guise of federalism that allows some hostile states to have discretion on how the federal legislation is implemented, we find that in states that are overrepresented by Black people, there's a less generous implementation of those policies.
Just as a fun side note, I was Ira Katznelson's research assistant for 5 years, and I worked on that book at the Schomburg. So I'm well aware of, you know, so many policies were specific and explicit in excluding Black people. Almost every policy in the United States is not just based on race, but racism. Yep. And so as you lay out some of the problems, let's try and talk about some of the solutions, because a lot of people in this room are actually in positions to help us figure out some of these solutions, whether it's on a political or a policy level. So where do we start? Because the problem is long. The problem is baked into our institutional design. If we believe bell hooks, you know, this is a country predicated on white supremacy and anti-Black racism, patriarchy and capitalism, racialized capitalism at that. So where do we start to sort of undo what has been sort of laid out in the origin of this nation?
Yeah, and you know, I don't think the solutions are that difficult. Okay. I think when we invest in people, our most treasured resource, that not only facilitates them, but it's good for our economy, right? If we think of people not just as consumption agents, but as productive components, indeed, one of the most human characteristics that we have is a desire to contribute productively to our society, often in a group formation. And this is not without historical precedent. We cite Ira Katznelson. Well, during that period of the Great Society and the New Deal, we had some of our most highest growth. And not only did we have high levels of growth, it was inclusive. So we had a rise in real wages that was about 92% from about 1948 to the early 1970s. And we had a doubling of productivity. So that's almost a 1-to-1 ratio between productivity rising and real wages rising for workers. And obviously, firms benefited as well. So this was a form of investments where we invested in people and the places they lived in. So again, I could design policies. If wealth is the issue, then what's the most critical ingredient for wealth building? Wealth itself, having some initial capital to put you in an asset that can passively increase over your lifetime. Obviously, we need to have issues around financial literacy. Obviously, we need protections against predation. But those other two things, in the absence of capital, become irrelevant. And again, this is not without precedent. And if we think about the GI Bill, about 80% of families during that time period involved somebody coming back from World War II as a veteran. And in the GI Bill, it included capital for starting a business. It included capital to go to school without debt. it included down payment assistance to own a home. You know, again, what was at issue was not only did a lot of these policies design in a way that Black people didn't benefit, but the implementation was at a local level and under a hostile Jim Crow, under a scenario where there's housing discrimination. It was not fully implemented to all people. So, you know, I think the solutions are more political problems than they are economic problems. It's not hard to design the policy, but at issue is the fact that the politics of this country is such that Black people are often, racism is often weaponized as a way to keep us from implementing policies. In other words, we characterize people as undeserving. We characterize government as tilting the scales in favor of undeserving people who are vividly and racialized as welfare queens, deadbeat dads, and predators, and the image is a Black person.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the quest for equity, it's often viewed as racist. But can I just unpack some of that? Because as we're, you know, you say that we need kind of wealth. Where do these Black families initially get said wealth?
Government policy. Again, I think that we can invest in people in the places they live. So baby bonds is an example of a policy. There's nothing deep about it. It is a birthright to capital, similar to Social Security. So right now, we have a policy that ensures that when we age into the twilight of our life, there's a reserve, there's an endowment, there is a pension, there is economic security. Well, we don't have anything for young people when they're first starting out to build a lifetime of economic security. So one could think about expanding Social Security towards when you're at your most critical stage, when you're just formulating your family, your career. It provides a nest egg so that, you know, again, you can have access to a vehicle to generate wealth similar to somebody who's born into wealth.
Okay. And I don't know if we'll have time for this, but I do want to just plant a seed. I want to get your thoughts on universal basic income as a way, hi there, to do that. But we'll circle back on that. Hello, Mehrsa, welcome.
Oh, I am so sorry. You're all New Yorkers who understand what traffic looks like. So please welcome Mehrsa Baradaran to the conversation. I'm so sorry.
So I'm going to ask both of you this question. Mehrsa, I'm going to give you a moment just to have a little water and bring it in. So Darrick, I'll start with you, and then Mehrsa, and then I'll circle back. So I had to dust off my AP Econ textbook last week with the SVB banking crisis. Because when I was in AP Economics, you know, I would always raise my hand and just say, well, why can't we just print more money, right? And finally, my professor was like, or my teacher was just like, if you ask to print money one more time. Then I went to Zimbabwe and I had a chicken sandwich and a beer for $1.3 million. And I realized you can't just print more money. Even though it seems like we're sort of teetering on that. But I was like, we're getting a little close. So one, I don't want to harp too much on it, but I do want to get both of your analyses on the recent bank closures and what they mean for Black people and Black wealth. Because we hear a lot about the tech corporations, and they're the ones that'll be affected. But we do know that, when America catches a cold, Black folks have the flu, pneumonia, and worse. And so are we in any greater danger now than, say, 2 weeks ago before the SVB collapse?
You want to start?
Sure. First of all, I apologize, but I think, like you said, I was going to start with that. When Wall Street catches a cold, Harlem catches the flu is the one that I kept hearing. You know, it is always the case that any banking crisis is going to ripple outwards. I mean, first, I think what we learn is that it is not true that the market will price the risks into the model. You have to have some sort of regulatory control of the banks. And this is an example, but we don't, it's almost like a lesson we never learn. And that once the crisis ripples out, I mean, you're already seeing the community banks almost had a run on, you know, the First National Bank, or one of these banks, was the 14th largest banks, took a dive. You know, you look at the stock price and it looks like a crypto, you know, NFT coin. These are banks, these are community banks. And the reason is because, you know, vulnerable, and these are not Black black-owned banks, just community banks. So of course, if community banks are going to falter, black-owned banks are going to do much worse because of the the trend toward, you have J.P. Morgan on the one hand and then the undercapitalized banks on the other. So yes, I think this is going to have effects, and it was predictable, it was predicted, and it is another demonstration of, we do print money, actually. We just turn the cannon always toward these markets that want to, need liquidity, which is true. But you call liquidity when it goes to the banks, but when it goes to people and communities, we call that some other thing, which is not quite different.
I mean, I'll add to the point about printing money. The United States is a sovereign monetary entity. The Fed has great capacities. We've seen that. We've seen it in recent history. Obviously, a constraint on the Fed facilitating liquidity is inflation itself. So, a question is the money being used for productive capacities? And I dare say there are many things in our society that we can do for productive capacities that could generate greater economic dynamism. So one thing is we are in a good place as a nation that we do have the ability to finance things that we desire, big, bold things. It's a myth to think that that the federal government is like a household with their budget. If the federal government were to get rid of all its debt, and I'm telling an astute audience this, so you probably might not surprise you, we would go into a tailspin of a recession that could lead us to a depression. So deficits in and of themselves are not bad. It depends on what it's being used for. And I'll amplify the point about Mehrsa that Mehrsa just made, which is perhaps we should use some of that federal capacity, and here this highlights what I've been trying to say, to invest in our most productive and righteous capacity, which is people and the places we live in. Mm-hmm. And it appears as though we've started to make a shift in that way. We've had a refundable child tax credit that got cut, but that was somewhat unprecedented for the United States. We decided that we were going to invest in families and people across the board through our tax code, which is our biggest fiscal tool, not just for consumption reasons, but to provide people agency to do big, bold things in their lives. So Christina just asked me about UBI. First off, I hate UBI, but I love guaranteed income. We don't need to make it universal basic income. There are plenty of people in this room that do not need additional income. And in fact, that would be inflationary. If we all got the same dollar amount, that's almost the definition of inflation. But if as an economic right, we ensure that every family has enough resources so that they can do basic things, like afford childcare so that they can go to work, so that they can do basic things, like be able to have transportation so that they can get to work. What we've seen from the demonstrations of those guaranteed income pilots and projects is that people didn't work less, they worked more. And that's the point.
Okay. Did you want to follow up? Or?
I have a point, but I can wait.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about your book, Color of Money. Mm-hmm. And the portion of the national wealth held by Black Americans mm-hmm. has increased less than 2 percentage points since the Emancipation Proclamation. Mm-hmm. Why is the wealth gap so deeply ingrained into our economy, and why has it persisted? Before you got here, Darrick sort of laid out his theories about the GI Bill and sort of some of the policies that have been baked in. But can you flesh that out for us?
I mean, to put it bluntly, because we haven't wanted, the government has not wanted to close the wealth gap, and it has been created for a reason, and it has been maintained because of the differentials. And it is also, it's not just that it's like some purposeful, cynical thing. It is a belief in what sort of supply and demand. What does the market demand? And it has not been sort of this idea of investing in other families, right? In certain families, certain things we invest in. I mean, look at the way that the market rewards like unicorns or geniuses. I mean, the way that Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, this is a person. His mom was my contracts professor. I know the family. The way that the market, the credit that he got from the market, $30 billion, to put that. Right? We have wrung out every last, he's very good at math. Sam Bankman-Fried, right? And we have wrung out every math genius, right? So if I can zoom out a little bit, when the last time the world had a free market was during the Silk Road, okay, where you have people trading from, Africa, Egypt to China. And that was a free market. There were some things going on, but it wasn't like murder for slaves, okay? Slave trade, pre-Cortez coming to slaughter Native Americans. And the theory of the free market back then, and this is, you can see this in Adam Smith's papers, this is where the theories come from. It's Arab scholars called Ibn Khaldun, Persian scholars, Chinese scholars, Egyptians, who are kind of theorizing this. This is way, pre-Socrates, pre-Aristotle. And one of the myths that they talked about is Aladdin and the Genie, right? You've seen the movie Aladdin and the Genie. And we see the Disney version of it, but one of the points of that story, and it was told by a Syrian trader, Aleppo trader up in France, and that's how it got in the books. But the idea is you go and you buy the lamp, right? The value isn't the lamp, it's the possibility of a genie, right? That's the market risk is risk and reward. It could have a genie or it could not. But the point of it's the genius inside, right? The genie is, in Arabic, it's the jinn, the genius, right? The idea is that every person you're trading with has an idea, is a genius, right? So, back in the day, it'd be, you bring saffron, you bring cardamom, cinnamon, whatever it was, gunpowder, paper, and you trade these ideas, and that's how a free market works. And I think since you have, the end of the free market with slaughter, you aren't trading with people anymore. You're taking the lamps and slaughtering the people. And I think that is something that we're still doing. We're not investing in geniuses in communities where we don't see genius.
So in our last few minutes here, and I love that point, because we're in a room of decision makers in the business world, philanthropy, government, all these sectors. And so how do we ensure that these interventions that they're leading or investing in are designed specifically to help Black prosperity? Because a lot of these conversations are about groups of color or people in general or poor people. But we know that there's a dichotomous relationship in this nation that always has been, that's very specific to Black people. And anti-Blackness has been very explicit and specific. So what are some of the policies that we can invest in with the leaders in this room to help mitigate some of these issues?
Without time running out, I'm gonna pick a fight with Mehrsa and say, I don't think there's a such thing as a free market. I think, and that's okay. Markets are political constructions. There's even the examples you gave, there's some structure to it, some decision making about who can trade and when they can trade. And I think we need to grasp that and understand that, because the notion that there is a free market lead us to a narrative and an understanding that markets and trading is somehow devoid of power, devoid of structure, and we need to recognize that power if we want to address the question that was just posed. So how can we make sure that these policies are done in a way that's racially inclusive? I'm going to use a word that some might not like. We have to be anti-racist. And if you don't like that word, we have to be race conscious. And what does that mean? The policies have to be, and this is from Ira Katz-Nelson, just taking what he put together and flipping it, designed, managed, and implemented in an intentionally racially inclusive way. And we can get specific about certain policies to make sure we do it. So policies where wealth is the criteria for inclusion and the criteria for an outcome has one effect of being default racially inclusive. Because of how the wealth distribution is situated in the United States. About 80% of Black families have below the median white wealth. So if you use that as a criteria for inclusion, for example, well, that's a design issue that might be intentionally racially inclusive. And we can come up with other ones to combat the Supreme Court, who has made it difficult for us to implement race-specific policies at this juncture. There are ways in which we can still, Mehrsa and I wrote an op-ed with Elizabeth Warren that talked about using legacy of growing up in a neighborhood that was redlined. So again, we don't want to hasten gentrification, but there are ways in which we can specifically design, manage, and implement policies that are racially inclusive.
I agree that we don't have a free market. I think it is a myth. But my emphasis on the free market is emphasis on freedom. You need to have freedom to choose and to trade in order to have a free market. So I think we departed the free market. The second, Cortez or whatever Rhodes in South Africa says, if you don't want to trade, we'll slaughter. The free market ended at that point. And so this is a historical point, but the relevant point is we are not investing in genies anymore. We're investing in, we think lamps are the thing, right? Like commodities or these things, these metals, right? And it's been gold for a long time, but now it's, who knows? Our assets don't make sense, right? Our assets are people. They've always been people. And there's this myth that the asset is there's no gold anywhere. Money's just a construction. It's magic. It's a myth. It's a great one we can use. It's very flexible. So I say, start a venture capital angel investor, like leverage to the hilt, and then invest in every single child in a redline community and every single person as a investment. Not this is just that this is the right way to grow assets. This is the right way to create a free market for the first time, is to really give people to let see the geniuses that we've never invested in.
Okay, so I know we have 1 minute, but as someone who's not in this world, I have to ask this question because I can't see Black people just getting $30 million like Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Right. Frankman, you know who I mean. Mr. Stanford, I'm on house arrest with my parents, right? So we see these sort of young white entrepreneurs being given millions upon millions of dollars. So why is it that sort of small businesses, Black-owned businesses can barely get $5,000, $10,000 in capital, but we're willing to give hundreds of millions of dollars to young white boys who are seen as geniuses?
It's perception. Look, the word credit comes from the word credere, which is to believe. We believe that is a genius. Sam Bankman-Fried, someone who's good with numbers. We do not believe that Black entrepreneurs are geniuses. We don't see it in our minds. This is where racism really just makes us inefficient. We cannot invest in people. And the Black scholars have been saying this forever. You have to be able to see it, right? Now we saw Oprah. Okay, there's that one unique person, but what she had to get through to get, so we're not seeing it because we don't invest. And so I think this is where the leadership in this room is you see it. I don't know, I wish that we could all see it, and I'm tired of actually asking the government to see it, because I've been, Darrick and I work a lot with them, and they're just not going to. It's sclerotic. It's this rigid structure.
Right. So if the government's not going to see it, we have the opportunity to have people in this room see it. I think it's let's have a real conversation in the last 1 minute. It's I really want to know, how can the people in this room sort of excavate said genius? Because it seems as though we're giving money to sort of these mediocre children and they're not doing well with it.
Exactly.
Well, so I guess I'll chime in two things. One is, I think that word freedom is a co-optation. I think if you are for trade and people really having freedom, a critical ingredient is resource. So if you're an authentic capitalist, we know that if somebody engages in trade and they have nothing, they're either at the whim of charity or the vulnerability of exploitation. So you want some baseline level of resource by which people can engage in society. So the notion of freedom has to include resources. Again, the notion of free market to me becomes co-opting language. I'm going to make that point crystal clear. And then as for whether government can or should do it, it's our government. So this notion of just government's not going to do it, we should abandon government, well, we won't succeed. At the end of the day, it is our government, it is our economy, and it is our monetary system that provides the liquidity and the resource to fulfill these things. So what can people do in this room? Demonstration. Be good actors. So if you're a business leader, have good business practices. If you're a business leader and you have additional resources, set up demonstrations to facilitate a movement to make government implement the economy that we want. Facilitate people and work together with them in that way. I think that's the best way we and everybody in this room can do and act and lead to a different society. But pessimism or the notion that government won't do it, well, that creates a status quo for which we will never change.
I'd like to thank my panelists, Mehrsa, Baradaran, and Darrick Hamilton. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Black Economic Alliance, for having us.
Thank you.